The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered planks of Port Haven's main dock as Captain Calder Black guided his ship, the Marauder's Grace, into the harbor with the practiced ease of a man who had called these waters home for over 2 decades. The vessel itself told a story of survival against impossible odds. Her hull bore the scars of countless battles, her sails were patched with fabric from a dozen different sources, and her crew moved with the efficiency of people who had learned to work together or die separately. But what made the Marauder's Grace truly unique wasn't her battle damage or her motley crew. It was the laughter that echoed from her decks. Children's voices mixed with the calls of seasoned sailors, creating a symphony that would have been impossible aboard any other pirate vessel in the Caribbean. Captain Black had earned his reputation not through cruelty or terror, but through an unusual form of mercy that had transformed his ship into something resembling a floating orphanage, more than a traditional pirate vessel. Calder himself was a man who commanded respect without demanding it. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with premature silver, and eyes the color of storm clouds, he moved with the confidence of someone who had faced death so many times that life held few surprises for him anymore. His clothes were well-made but practical, and the cutlass at his hip showed the wear of frequent use rather than decorative display. "Drop anchor," he called to his crew, his voice carrying easily across the deck, despite its conversational tone. "Tommy, take young Sarah and Marcus to help secure the rigging. Elena, make sure the little ones stay below deck until we've assessed the town's mood." Elena Vasquez, his first mate and the closest thing to a mother figure the ship's children had ever known, nodded grimly. At 45, she had sailed with Calder for 8 years, ever since he'd rescued her from a Spanish prison, where she'd been left to rot for the crime of defending her village from raiders. She understood better than most that not every port welcomed the unusual family they had created aboard the Marauder's Grace. Port Haven appeared peaceful enough, a small trading settlement that served as a way station for merchants traveling between the larger Caribbean ports. The town's buildings were a mixture of Spanish colonial architecture and newer English construction, reflecting the complex political history of these waters. Fishing boats bobbed alongside merchant vessels in the harbor, while the docks bustled with the usual collection of sailors, traders, and local workers going about their daily business. But Calder had learned to read the subtle signs that separated friendly ports from hostile ones. The way conversation stopped when his ship appeared, the speed with which some vessels suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, the positioning of the port's small garrison of Marines, all of it told him that Port Haven was cautious rather than welcoming when it came to unknown vessels flying pirate colors. "Captain," called 16-year-old Thomas Morrison, the oldest of the ship's children and Calder's unofficial lieutenant when it came to managing the younger ones. "Should we prepare for a quick departure?" Thomas had been with them for 3 years, rescued from a burning merchant vessel that had been attacked by real pirates, the kind who showed no mercy to civilians or children. He'd grown from a terrified boy into a capable young man under Calder's guidance, and his instincts for danger had saved them all more than once. "Not yet," Calder replied, studying the town through his spyglass. "But stay ready. Something feels different about this place, though I can't put my finger on what." What felt different, though Calder didn't realize it yet, was the woman watching his ship from the second-story window of the Anchor's Rest Inn. Isla Donovan had run the establishment for 5 years. Ever since her husband's death had left her alone with a business to manage, and a secret that had slowly isolated her from the close-knit community she called home. At 28, Isla was still young enough to be considered a catch by the town's eligible bachelors, but old enough that her continued unmarried state had begun to generate whispers and speculation. She was beautiful in the understated way of someone who had learned to downplay her appearance. Auburn hair usually pulled back in a practical bun, green eyes that held depths of sadness she tried to hide, and a smile that never quite reached those eyes despite her best efforts. The truth was that Isla carried a burden that made her feel like damaged goods in a society that valued women primarily for their ability to bear children. A childhood illness had left her barren, a fact that had ended her first engagement and made every subsequent courtship feel like a lie built on false hopes. She had learned to deflect questions about children and marriage with practiced ease, but the loneliness was a constant companion that no amount of business success could cure. Watching the unusual pirate ship in the harbor, Isla found herself curious about the sounds of children's laughter that carried across the water. Pirates weren't supposed to travel with families, weren't supposed to create anything resembling a normal life aboard their vessels. Yet the evidence of her eyes and ears suggested otherwise, and something about that contradiction intrigued her in ways she couldn't explain. Calder's decision to come ashore was prompted by practical concerns rather than curiosity. The Marauder's Grace needed supplies, and more importantly, several of the children were showing signs of the vitamin deficiency that could lead to scurvy if not addressed quickly. Fresh fruits and vegetables were essential, and Port Haven's market appeared well stocked with the provisions they needed. "Elena, you're with me," he announced, checking his pistols and ensuring his cutlass hung properly at his side. "We'll test the waters and see if this town is willing to do business with honest pirates." The phrase would have been an oxymoron to most people, but Calder had long ago decided that honesty was more valuable than reputation when it came to building the kind of life he wanted for his unconventional family. He paid fair prices for what he needed, avoided unnecessary violence, and made it clear that anyone who threatened the children under his protection would face consequences that made traditional piracy look merciful by comparison. The Anchor's Rest Inn sat at the heart of Port Haven's commercial district, its whitewashed walls and red tile roof marking it as one of the more prosperous establishments in town. Calder chose it not for its comfort, but for its strategic location. From its common room, he could observe the town's reactions to his presence while conducting the kind of business that required privacy and discretion. Isla was behind the bar when he entered, polishing glasses with the automatic movements of someone whose hands stayed busy while their mind wandered elsewhere. She looked up as the door opened, and Calder found himself meeting eyes that held a wariness he recognized, the look of someone who had learned that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Welcome to the Anchor's Rest," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that suggested education and refinement despite the practical nature of her current occupation. "We don't get many captains in Port Haven. What brings you to our waters?" Calder appreciated directness, especially when it came wrapped in courtesy rather than hostility. "Supplies and rest, if your town is willing to provide both. My crew includes some who need fresh provisions more than most." Something in his tone caught Isla's attention, a note of concern that didn't match her preconceptions about pirate captains. "Children," she said, not quite making it a question. "I heard voices from your ship that didn't sound like your typical crew." 12 of them, Calder confirmed, settling onto a bar stool with the ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Ages 5 to 16, all of them rescued from situations that would have killed them if we hadn't intervened. They're the reason I'm particular about the ports we visit." Isla studied him with growing fascination. Everything about this man contradicted what she thought she knew about pirates. His manner, his obvious concern for children, even the way he sat without trying to intimidate or impress her. That's unusual. Most captains I've heard of consider children a liability at sea. "Most captains haven't learned what I have," Calder replied, accepting the mug of ale she placed before him. "A ship full of people who have nowhere else to go will fight harder than any crew motivated by gold alone. But more than that, those children give us something worth protecting beyond our own lives." The conversation was interrupted by Elena's entrance, her weathered face showing the strain of the afternoon's reconnaissance. "Captain, we've got a problem. Word spread about the children, and there are questions being asked about whether we're slavers or kidnappers. The Port Authority wants to inspect the ship." Calder's expression darkened, but his voice remained calm. "Expected, but not welcomed. How much time do we have?" "Maybe an hour before they work up the courage to demand boarding rights," Elena replied. "Unless someone vouches for us, this could get ugly fast." It was then that Isla made a decision that would change her life forever. Something about Calder's obvious love for the children under his care, combined with the quiet desperation she recognized in Elena's eyes, moved her to act before caution could intervene. "I'll vouch for you," she said quietly, her words carrying clearly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the inn's common room. "As a respected business owner and longtime resident of Port Haven, my word carries weight with the authorities. But I'll need to meet these children first to satisfy my own conscience about what I'm endorsing." Calder studied her for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities with the calculation of someone whose decisions often meant the difference between life and death for those depending on him. "That's generous of you, Miss Isla Donovan, and it's not generosity, it's curiosity. I've never met a pirate who collected children instead of treasure." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deck of the Marauder's Grace as Isla followed Calder and Elena up the gangplank, her heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She had expected to find evidence of the harsh realities of pirate life, perhaps malnourished children pressed into service, or worse. Instead, she discovered something that challenged everything she thought she knew about life at sea. The ship's deck had been transformed into something resembling a floating village square. Hammocks were strung between the masts to create shaded play areas, while barrels and crates had been arranged to form makeshift seating and tables. Children of various ages moved about with the easy confidence of those who belonged, their clothes clean and well-mended, despite the obvious signs of hard use. "Captain's back," called a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, her dark curls dancing as she ran toward them. "Did you bring the oranges? Marcus says his teeth are getting loose again." Calder caught the child in his arms, swinging her around with practiced ease. "Hello, little sparrow. Yes, I brought oranges and apples and even some of those honey cakes you love so much. But first, I want you to meet someone special." The girl studied Isla with the frank curiosity of childhood, her brown eyes taking in every detail of the stranger's appearance. "Are you going to stay with us? We don't get many ladies who aren't trying to make us go to orphanages." The comment hit Isla like a physical blow, revealing layers of struggle she hadn't considered. "Orphanages?" she asked quietly. "Well-meaning authorities," Elena explained with barely concealed anger. "They see children aboard a pirate vessel and assume we've kidnapped them or worse. They don't bother to ask what those children were running from, or why a supposedly dangerous pirate ship might be the safest place they've ever known." Calder set the girl down gently, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Sarah here was living on the streets of Port Royal when we found her, stealing scraps to survive after her parents died of fever. The local orphanage had turned her away because they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. I tried to pickpocket the captain," Sarah added with obvious pride. "He caught me, but instead of turning me over to the constables, he gave me a proper meal and asked if I wanted to come with us." More children began to emerge from various parts of the ship, drawn by the sound of their captain's voice and the promise of fresh supplies. Isla counted 12, just as Calder had said, ranging from a boy who looked barely 5 to the 16-year-old Thomas she had glimpsed earlier. What struck her most was not their diversity in age and appearance, but the obvious affection they showed for both Calder and Elena. "This is Marcus," Calder said, introducing a thin boy of perhaps 10 whose pale complexion suggested the vitamin deficiency that had prompted their urgent need for fresh provisions. "He was cabin boy aboard a merchant vessel when pirates attacked. Real pirates," he added with emphasis, "the kind who would have thrown him overboard once they'd looted the ship." Marcus stepped forward with a slight limp that spoke of old injuries, but his smile was genuine as he offered Isla a small bow. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Are you going to help us get supplies? The fruit vendors sometimes refuse to deal with pirates, even when we've got good silver to pay with." The casual mention of prejudice and the matter-of-fact way these children discussed their traumatic pasts revealed a harsh reality that Isla had never considered. These weren't kidnapped innocents or pressed slaves. They were survivors who had found safety in the most unlikely place imaginable. "Tell me about the others," Isla said, settling onto a crate as the children gathered around with the eagerness of those who rarely had new audiences for their stories. The tales that emerged painted a picture of the Caribbean's forgotten casualties, children orphaned by disease, war, and the casual violence that marked life in these troubled waters. There was Elena's niece, rescued from raiders who had destroyed her village, twin brothers who had survived a shipwreck that claimed their parents, a girl whose family had been killed by slavers, leaving her to fend for herself in a world that had no place for unprotected children. "But why a pirate ship?" Isla asked. "Surely there are other options, other people who could help." Elena laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Could help, yes. Would help? That's a different question entirely. Churches preach charity but claim they lack resources. Colonial authorities see problems to be managed rather than children to be saved. Even well-meaning families rarely want the responsibility of someone else's traumatized child. Captain Calder doesn't see us as problems," said a quiet girl named Anna, who had been introduced as a refugee from a Spanish settlement destroyed in a colonial war. "He sees us as crew. We all have jobs, we all contribute, and we all share in whatever the ship earns." This revelation surprised Isla more than anything else she had learned. "You mean they actually participate in piracy?" "We prefer the term maritime redistribution," Thomas said with a grin that made him look older than his 16 years. "But yes, we all have roles when action is necessary. The younger ones stay below deck and help with damage control. The older ones assist with sailing and navigation. Captain Calder says the best way to build confidence is to give people real responsibilities. Calder had been listening to this exchange with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew his methods were unconventional, but effective. Traditional piracy is about taking what you want through force, he explained to Isla. What we practice is more selective. We target ships carrying goods stolen from those who can't defend themselves, slave traders, corrupt officials, merchants who cheat their workers. The children understand the difference. And when we do take prizes, Sarah added proudly, part of the money goes to buying supplies for other children who need help. Captain says that's called paying it forward. The afternoon wore on as Isla learned more about the unusual family that had formed aboard the Marauder's Grace. She discovered that Elena served not just as first mate, but as teacher, using captured books and charts to provide the children with an education that emphasized practical skills alongside traditional learning. She learned that Calder had established a network of contacts throughout the Caribbean, sympathetic merchants, reformed pirates, and others who helped place older children in legitimate employment when they chose to leave the ship. Most importantly, she began to understand that what she was witnessing wasn't an idealistic fantasy, but a functioning alternative to the harsh realities that awaited unwanted children in the colonial Caribbean. These kids had found something precious and rare, a place where they were valued for who they were rather than dismissed for what they lacked. As the sun began to set, painting the harbor in shades of gold and crimson, Isla found herself reluctant to return to shore. The loneliness that had defined her life for so long seemed less acute in the presence of this unconventional family, and something about Calder's quiet confidence made her feel possibilities she hadn't dared consider in years. "You'll vouch for us with the authorities?" Calder asked as they prepared to escort her back to the dock. Isla nodded, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Yes, but I have a condition." Calder raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Let me help with the supply run tomorrow. If I'm going to stake my reputation on your character, I want to understand exactly what kind of operation you're running here." For the first time since she'd met him, Calder smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered features and made her understand why 12 orphan children had chosen to trust their lives to this unusual pirate captain. "Deal," he said simply. "But fair warning, once you're part of this family, even temporarily, we don't let go easily." 3 weeks had passed since Isla first stepped aboard the Marauder's Grace, and what had begun as a simple supply run had evolved into something far more complicated. She found herself spending her afternoons on the ship, helping Elena with the children's lessons and discovering talents she never knew she possessed. The inn continued to operate smoothly under the management of her assistant Maria, but Isla's heart was increasingly divided between the life she had built on shore and the unexpected family she had found at sea. The turning point came on a humid evening when the Port Authority finally departed, satisfied that Calder's crew posed no threat to Port Haven's residents. The children celebrated with an impromptu feast on deck, using the fresh provisions Isla had helped them acquire at fair prices from merchants who had learned to trust her judgment. As the evening wound down and the younger children were settled into their hammocks below deck, Isla found herself alone with Calder at the ship's rail, watching the stars reflect on the calm harbor waters. The conversation that followed would change everything between them. "You've been good for them," Calder said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "The children, I mean. They've started asking if you're going to stay permanently." Isla felt her heart skip at the suggestion, but years of protecting herself from disappointment made her cautious. "And what do you tell them?" "That it's not my decision to make," he replied, turning to study her face in the moonlight. "But I hope you'll consider it. This family needs someone like you." The word family hung between them, loaded with implications that Isla wasn't sure she was ready to explore. "Calder, there's something you should know about me. Something that makes the idea of a real family complicated." He waited patiently, recognizing the tone of someone about to share a painful truth. "I can't have children," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of years of shame and isolation. "A childhood illness left me barren. It's why my engagement ended, why every courtship since has felt like a lie. Most men want heirs, want to build something that will outlast them." To her surprise, Calder smiled, not with pity or discomfort, but with genuine warmth. "Good," he said, his response so unexpected that Isla was momentarily speechless. "I've got enough kids for both of us." The simple acceptance in his voice, The complete absence of judgment or disappointment broke something loose inside Isla that she had kept carefully guarded for years. "You don't understand," she insisted. "I can never give you biological children, never carry on your bloodline." "Isla," Calder said gently, reaching out to take her hand. "Look around you. Do you see any children here who share my blood? Do you think Sarah loves me less because I didn't father her? Or that Marcus is any less my son because he wasn't born to me?" The truth of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had spent weeks watching this unconventional family function, had seen the genuine affection between Calder and his adopted children, had witnessed the way love transcended biology in ways she had never imagined possible. "Family isn't about blood," Calder continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her knuckles. "It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing to care for people who need you. It's about creating something worth protecting and being willing to sacrifice for it." Before Isla could respond, their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the harbor. A small boat was approaching the Marauder's Grace, its occupant calling out in obvious distress. Calder immediately shifted into captain mode, his protective instincts activated by the potential threat to his crew. "What's your business?" he called out, his hand moving instinctively to his cutlass. "Please," came a woman's voice from the darkness. "I need help. My son, they're going to take my son." The boat bumped against the ship's hull, revealing a middle-aged woman whose tear-streaked face spoke of desperation beyond mere fear. Elena appeared at Calder's shoulder, having heard the disturbance, while several of the older children gathered at the rail to observe the unfolding drama. "Explain," Calder commanded, though his tone had softened with compassion. "I'm Margaret Winters," the woman said, accepting the rope ladder that Thomas had lowered for her. "My husband died last month, and the creditors are claiming everything. They want to sell my boy into indentured servitude to cover the debts. He's only 14, but they say it's legal under colonial law." Isla felt her stomach clench with familiar outrage. She had seen similar situations in Port Haven, where economic hardship could tear families apart with brutal efficiency. The legal system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable often served the interests of those wealthy enough to manipulate it. "Where is your son now?" Elena asked, her maternal instincts clearly engaged. "Hidden with friends in town, but they won't be able to keep him safe for long. The constables will start searching houses tomorrow. I heard about your ship, about how you help children who have nowhere else to go. I'm begging you, please don't let them destroy my boy's life." Calder exchanged glances with Elena, a silent conversation passing between them that spoke of years of partnership and shared values. Then he looked at Isla, and she realized he was including her in the decision-making process, treating her as an equal voice in the family's choices. "We'll need to move quickly," Isla said before she could second-guess herself. "I know the constable's patrol routes, and I can provide cover if you need to get the boy out of town quietly." "You're sure?" Calder asked, his eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. "Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be as wanted as we are if the authorities connect you to his disappearance." Isla thought about her quiet life in Port Haven, about the safety and respectability she had built through years of careful behavior and social conformity. Then she looked at Margaret Winters' desperate face and thought about a 14-year-old boy whose future hung in the balance. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Some things are more important than reputation." The rescue operation unfolded with the precision of a military campaign. Isla used her knowledge of the town to guide a small team through back alleys and abandoned buildings, while Calder and Elena prepared the ship for a quick departure. By dawn, Margaret Winters and her son David were safely aboard the Marauder's Grace, beginning their new lives as part of the ship's extended family. As Port Haven disappeared behind them, Isla stood once again at the ship's rail, but this time her perspective had fundamentally changed. She was no longer a visitor observing an unusual experiment. She was a full participant in something that mattered more than anything she had ever been part of before. "Any regrets?" Calder asked, joining her as the crew set course for open waters. Isla smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Only that it took me so long to find my real family." The Marauder's Grace caught the wind and surged forward, carrying its unconventional crew toward whatever adventures awaited them on the endless Caribbean seas. 6 months at sea had transformed Isla in ways she never could have imagined when she first stepped aboard the Marauder's Grace. Her hands, once soft from innkeeper's work, were now calloused from handling rope and sail. Her skin had bronzed under the Caribbean sun, and her movements had acquired the easy balance of someone truly at home on a ship's deck. But the most profound changes were invisible. The confidence that came from being needed, the peace that came from belonging, and the joy that came from watching love create family bonds stronger than any forged by blood. The ship had acquired 3 more children during their travels, bringing their floating family to 16 souls who had found safety and purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. There was young Roberto, rescued from slavers who had planned to sell him in Havana, twin girls named Hope and Faith, orphaned when disease swept through their fishing village. Each addition had been seamlessly integrated into the ship's community, proof that love had an infinite capacity for expansion. Isla had found her role as the ship's heart and conscience, the one who soothed nightmares and celebrated small victories with equal dedication. She taught the children to read and write, helped Elena with the endless tasks of keeping 16 young people fed and clothed, and served as Calder's partner in the countless decisions that shaped their daily lives. The morning that would test everything they had built together began like any other. The Marauder's Grace was anchored in a secluded cove near the island of Dominica, taking on fresh water and allowing the children to swim in the crystal-clear lagoon. The sounds of laughter and splashing filled the air as the younger ones played under Elena's watchful eye, while the older children helped Calder perform routine maintenance on the ship's rigging. The attack came without warning. 3 ships emerged from behind the rocky headland that protected their cove, flying the black flags that marked them as the worst kind of pirates, the sort who showed no mercy to anyone, regardless of age or innocence. Their leader was Captain Blood Valdez, a man whose reputation for cruelty had made him feared throughout the Caribbean. "All children below deck now," Calder commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience in crisis situations. The transformation from peaceful family gathering to combat readiness happened with practiced efficiency, but Isla could see the fear in the children's eyes as they scrambled for safety. "How many guns?" Elena asked, her own cutlass already in hand as she assessed their tactical situation. 36 on the lead ship, maybe 20 each on the others," Calder replied grimly. "We're outgunned 3-1, but we've got better position and motivation." Isla found herself checking the pistol Calder had taught her to use, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and determination. These weren't abstract enemies threatening distant strangers. They were predators hunting her family, and she would fight to her last breath to protect the children who had become more precious to her than her own life. The battle that followed was unlike anything Isla could have imagined. The Marauder's Grace's cannons roared defiance at the attacking ships, while Calder's crew fought with the desperate courage of people defending everything they held dear. Isla found herself reloading weapons and carrying messages between gun crews, her fear transformed into focused energy by the knowledge that 16 children depended on their success. The turning point came when one of Valdez's ships managed to close for boarding action. Pirates swarmed over the rail with cutlasses gleaming in murder in their eyes, only to find themselves facing defenders who fought like cornered wolves. Calder was everywhere at once, his blade weaving patterns of death as he protected his crew. Elena fought beside him with the ferocity of a mother defending her cubs, while even the older children contributed by carrying supplies and tending wounds. It was Isla who spotted the danger that could have ended everything. Valdez himself had circled around to attack from the stern, his own boat approaching the ship's most vulnerable point, while the main battle raged at the bow. Without thinking, she grabbed a loaded musket and fired, the shot taking Valdez in the shoulder and sending him tumbling into the water. The sight of their captain's defeat broke the attackers' morale. Those who could retreated to their remaining ships, while the wounded were left behind to surrender or die as they chose. As the smoke cleared and the enemy vessels limped away, Isla found herself surrounded by the children she had helped save, their faces shining with relief and pride. "You saved us," whispered Sarah, clinging to Isla's skirts with the desperate affection of someone who had nearly lost everything again. "We saved each other," Isla corrected gently, looking around at the family they had all chosen to protect. "That's what families do." Later that evening, as the ship sailed toward safer waters and the children settled into their hammocks with the resilience that marked those who had survived too much, Isla found herself once again at the rail with Calder. The conversation that followed was different from their first such talk. Not the tentative exploration of possibility, but the confident planning of people who had found their place in the world. "I want to marry you," Calder said without preamble, his directness marking it as a statement of fact rather than a romantic proposal. Not because of some grand passion or desperate need, but because we work, because we've built something worth making permanent. Isla smiled, remembering the woman who had once thought herself incomplete because she couldn't bear children. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone who had failed to understand that family was about choice and commitment rather than biology and tradition. Yes, she said simply, but I want Elena to perform the ceremony. She's been more of a mother to these children than anyone, and this family deserves to have its own traditions. The wedding took place 3 days later, on the deck of the Marauder's Grace, with the entire crew serving as witnesses. Elena spoke words about love and commitment that came from the heart, rather than any prayer book, while the children showered the couple with flower petals stolen from their last port of call. It was unlike any wedding ceremony Isla had ever imagined, but it was perfect for the family they had created together. As the Caribbean sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isla reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost the conventional life she had thought she wanted, only to discover something infinitely more valuable, a family bound not by blood or law, but by the conscious choice to love and protect each other, regardless of the cost. The Marauder's Grace sailed on through the gathering darkness, carrying its precious cargo of dreams made real toward whatever adventures awaited them on the endless sea. In the distance, dolphins raced alongside the ship as if celebrating the victory of love over loneliness, hope over despair, and family over everything else the world might throw at them. Some treasures, Isla had learned, couldn't be stolen or lost, only chosen and cherished for as long as the heart had the courage to keep beating.